service. Hopefully I didn't break this when I
Oh, that's
set
kind
it
of
up.
cool. I got a notification that this was being recorded. That's new.
New feature,
Zoom is
yeah.
being more privacy secure,
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
more conscious.
Are they gonna actually fix the real security bugs too? Or is this just kidding?
Probably.
At some
Just
point.
for optics.
I do think it's kind of a cool feature. Okay, excellent connection. I believe we are live, which means I should now tell our channel.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep, you sound good.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Now I can't hear him. I don't know if you guys can.
Nope.
You can't hear me?
Now we can.
Now I can.
Maybe I was mumbling.
Always a possibility.
Sometimes I mumble when I'm trying to think and talk. So that's why I usually don't talk when I'm thinking, or think when I'm talking. But
Do you talk to your code?
multitasking is a lie. So do I talk to my code?
Yeah. I 100% talk to my code.
You talk to your code.
Yeah. Especially debugging.
What do you say to it? Like, come on, code,
Aha!
do it.
I found ya, you stinking bug.
Well, that's talking to the bug. But
Okay.
you talk to your code like maybe in an encouraging fashion. Like, come on, little guy, you can do it. Just
So,
go
like,
ahead
what
and
are
loop.
you doing here?
Finish that loop out. Come on.
It's more like, yeah, it's a dialogue, right? It's like, what exactly is going on here? What do you think you're doing? Okay, what you think you're doing is not what I think you're doing. So somewhere in here we have a mismatch.
Nice. How about you, Amel? Do you talk to your code? You're muted, Amel.
I think talk is an understatement.
Okay. For instance?
Like I'm a visual thinker, so you know, the code is just like a visual representation of like what I'm trying to do, and I feel like it's like created in my head as a series of blocks and arrows, and then it just prints onto the screen in text form. But yeah, I don't know. And like I like solve problems like in the shower or like in my dreams. Sometimes it's really weird. Like, you know, it's like the subconscious mind is a fascinating beast. So, but anyways.
Yeah, the shower really is the best place to think. It makes me wonder,
shower brain.
why don't
yeah.
we take more showers or longer showers?
Well, it's not the shower, it's the distractions. It's that your brain doesn't have a lot of external like stimulation. So you're just inward, you know?
So you just got to get inward at more times.
Yeah, you need to
Like power naps are like secret powers. For me,
I think conscious inward time. So it's like meditation, nature walks, you know, things that are, yeah, sure. But things that get you out of your own head, essentially, get your like focused brain out of, you know, out of the way. So Nick, really quick, we had a listener who was interested in hearing about, to quote him or them, I'm really interested in folks' real world experience with Svelte. I've played around with it and I've heard a lot of hobby experience, but I'd love to hear about the productionized like engineering process environment. And, you know, it's legit, like, you know, it's not being,
no,
I'm just curious if that's something that you can speak to or not.
Yeah. So, I mean, we have, for my team, I have 4 different production dashboards that all run on Svelte. It's been like an amazing experience. Basically what we do is we have a PostGraph file backend that spins up a full CRUD interface for us and a GraphQL endpoint. And then we have our own little JWT logic in there and then lock down the mutations that we don't care about. But we have like basically the dashboard you specify in a YUP file. YUP is like a validation framework. Specify all the metadata around the fields that you need to build. And we have like one Svelte component that consumes that output and builds the forms for you. And then like it's been fantastic. I've tried to build a couple interfaces in React and haven't had as much luck with it. It's just like super easy to maintain. Our team loves it. And normally like internal dashboards they're not very fun to build. And with Svelte, they're actually kind of a joy to build. Yeah. As far as on the front end, I feel like Svelte with GraphQL is like cheat codes. Like I really feel that way on like consumer facing stuff. And yeah, overall, it's been a sheer joy to do. I know one person on our team wasn't thrilled with the testing story, but we're a small team, so it's pretty obvious who breaks stuff normally. And I'm kind of one of those people that likes to move fast, and I only test stuff that's absolutely vital.
Cool. Yeah. We'll talk. Well, thank you so much. We can dig into. Sorry to make you repeat yourself, but we can. Yeah. I guess.
Not a problem.
Short answer is yes. He can.
Yes.
Speak to that.
Yes.
Let's start the show since we're already doing the show. Before the show, here comes the intro music. Hey, Beardicus is in the chat. Omri, Aiden, what's up, guys? I haven't seen Beardicus in a minute. See you in there. Everyone's recording correct. I forgot to confirm. Yeah. Welcome back, everyone. It's JS party time. And speaking of back, Amel is back. What's up, Amel? How are you?
I am well. Thank you so much, Jared.
Happy June. Happy summertime.
Indeed.
And K-Ball is here. What's up, K-Ball?
Hey, I'm doing great. I have coffee in the office again. It's awesome.
He's in the office. He's drinking coffee. That's the K-Ball we know and love.
You got it.
And we also have a special guest. It's Nick Reese. Nick, thanks for coming on the party.
Hey, thanks for having me.
We are excited to talk about Svelte today, to talk about static site generators, to talk about Elder.js, which is your project. But first off, we need to address this. Nick has imposter syndrome, y'all. Nick, welcome to the club. We all have imposter syndrome here, and we're all welcome. But you felt like maybe you're not qualified to be talking on a JavaScript podcast. What's up with that, man? Of course, you're here. You're qualified. No imposters.
Yeah, so I've only been writing meaningful code for like 3 years, and it's kind of funny because I never really identified as being a developer, coder, anything like that. Prior to this, I've built several SEO companies and startups and had several exits, and essentially I have to have something to do with my time, and I find building out useful websites for consumers is kind of where I spend that. And I built the static site generator for fun, and it kind of grew into something that I decided to open source and, has meaningful usage in the world. And it's kind of strange because I'm like, I've never had my code critiqued. It worked. That's what I know. And feels a little strange to have, to imagine people picking through my code and saying, oh, that this could be more efficient or whatnot. But I think everyone has some of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, congratulations on the success. Sometimes just the confidence to put it out there is what it takes. To overcome that feeling of this is not good enough to open up or to release, and being willing to face the fire of a bunch of fellow nerds, poking and prodding and saying, why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? You shouldn't have done this. You shouldn't have done that. Sometimes that's the scary thing, but you got past that and you've got some people interested. So that's a cool thing.
Yeah, it's been fun. It's been really enjoyable to have like actual feedback to my code. Before this, essentially, my team would just commit my code because I was the boss, and now it's like seeing people using my code because it's actually useful is pretty nice. So yeah, it's definitely a flip of the tables. I've never really had code review, and so it's cool to see other people review my code and say how things can be more efficient. It's a nice feedback loop to improve.
Yeah,
code reviews are one of the most underrated tools when it comes to like teaching and learning and growing. I don't know if folks appreciate it. It just feels like a chore. It's like, I got to get this over got to submit this PR for review, quote unquote, but it's like, it's such a great mechanism for like giving your colleagues feedback and then also getting inside other people's, brains of like how they would do it. So it's just, I love giving feedback and getting feedback on my code. It's the best.
You love both. So I do not love giving the feedback. I don't mind receiving it because I'm trying to improve, and I know my code is not what it could be, or there's other better ideas. But the giving side for me always feels like the chore. Like if I had 10 to-dos on a day and one of them was, code review K-Ball's code, it would be I just automatically put it at number 10 because I just don't want to do it. So I end up blocking people. It's terrible. What about you, K-Ball?
Well, I think reviewing code and reading code is its own separate skill from writing code. And it's one that we don't always flex in the same way. Mm-hmm. I've actually been investigating the possibility of putting a code review stage into an interview process because I think it is such an important set of skills. How do you read and understand code that you didn't write? How do you read? And let's be honest, like read and understand code you wrote 6 months ago is basically the same problem.
You're right.
But how do you read and understand it? How do you critique it? How do you think about it? And how do you give useful and constructive feedback? Those are all unique skills, but extremely valuable. Mm-hmm. I also want to loop back a little bit on the new to coding thing. You actually have a superpower, Nick, which is you have experience out in things that are not coding. So many times people who are coming up purely in the coding path, they're like, oh, but what should I build? I know, I'll make a developer tool, because they're so stuck in this like isolated world and this idea of like, what is actually useful to people who are not software developers, what's going to make a good business or a good open source project that's not just serving other developers is actually a very hard step. So I love to see folks coming to coding late in their careers or midway in their careers, having already done some sort of other expertise. I think it sets you up very well for success within this field, just as it sounds like you've already seen success in other fields.
It makes a ton of sense to me because on my end, I see all these opportunities, and that's the reason I got into programming, is so that I could actually start tackling those opportunities. Because there's like that step between where you have an idea, but you need to communicate it. And sometimes that's not high enough bandwidth, especially once you're like a talented developer. You can almost just spin up your ideas faster yourself than having to manage a team. And I'm always been a really big fan of really tiny teams, like more than 7 people. Like none of my companies should be larger than that. Because if you can't do that, suddenly your communication explodes exponentially. You have politics, you have everything else. And for me, it's just like, I like to move fast. And like, if I'm the bottleneck and my typing speed is the bottleneck, that's generally what matters to me. And that's the reason why I've been attracted to developing in general.
Yeah, prototypes even are one of the most effective ways to communicate an idea. Can you create a prototype that shows what you have in mind? And for me as well, doing that in code is way faster than trying to do that in some sort of GUI tool or some other thing.
100% agree.
Plus, it's just the autonomy and the fact that like it's fun to bring at least a prototype or at least some aspect of your idea into the world without anybody's help. I mean, maybe a little bit of help there, here or there, but when you can go from idea to deployed something on your own, whether you're a CEO of a startup or whether you're just a tinkerer who has this idea, that I think is very satisfying. And I think that's what drives a lot of the willingness to learn more and go through the arduous process of getting better, is because like that feeling, that those endorphins when you actually deploy, pretty rad. And while working in the team is fun, I think when it comes to creating something brand new, I think if you can do it without needing anybody, that's kind of a superpower too.
I would say that's probably one of my favorite things about releasing Elder.js is like, generally when you use an off-the-shelf tool, you might look at it and say, I wish it did this thing. Well, now I can do that and say, oh, well, I can actually make it do that thing. Like just recently on a project that we were building, it's called, I can talk about it later, but it's called Find Energy. It's a site we released with Elder.js. We're shipping these huge payloads to the browser. And generally what we've done before that is build these little custom functions that would basically write everything to an array and then have the reverse of that on the browser, right? Because if you're passing JSON, those keys can be duplicated just a huge amount of times. And like on our Texas page, like the payload was like 500 kilobytes because we're rehydrating it in the browser. I was like, it's really strange to me that no framework essentially goes through, collects all the props that are going to be written to the HTML, creates a custom dictionary, and then unpacks it on the browser. And I was like, I wonder if that could work. And I took like a quick power nap And I woke up and I was like, I just can't stop thinking about this idea. Yeah. And about 2 hours later, I had it built into Elder.js, and it, after Brotli, it's still saving it 10% of the size. And I was able to reduce the HTML size of those props by like 46%. So it's pretty satisfying to be able to do that very quickly. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know of any other framework that does like prop compression, but it feels like it should exist if you're using islands essentially to partially hydrate stuff. Yeah. Because often, for instance, the word Texas was in those props hundreds of times. There's no reason that we should have that so many times when it's incredibly easy to use a map and build a custom dictionary for the browser to unpack that.
That's kind of fun. So you're applying code minification to data because you've got JSON-based data.
Yep.
Right. And knowledge of the system and the ability to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. To be honest, I think it's the reason why maybe this hasn't been quote unquote invented yet at scale is there's so many clean boundaries that are drawn. There's separation of concerns, and a lot of times people are focused on kind of optimizing their little bucket, their concern. And I think the kind of the orchestra of concerns, when they're working together, isn't like the end-to-end optimization of web development and serving assets, like from, source to user, isn't a pipeline that's like, there's lots of leaks in that pipeline, and it's because no one is solely focused on the pipeline. Everybody's focused on their little pipe, and so integration and
the orchestra of concerns. I think that's like a
thing.
A new talk by Amel Hussein.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I could write a book, like a coffee book with just like titles of inspiring tech talks, like all the problems. No, literally. We maybe we should like do that as a podcast. Play some.
That
slow
would be
music,
cool.
And I'll just like
here's a bunch of ideas of talks people should do.
Right. Put it out into the universe. Just delegate.
Mel's gonna do inspiring ones, and I'll just do bad dad puns.
The flip verse. But yeah, like I think, so I think frameworks, JavaScript frameworks have historically taken on, I think, that a big burden, when it comes to the orchestra of concerns, right? There's a lot of abstraction around multiple layers of user interactions that are just kind of simplified for developers. But it's really cool to see that y'all have taken it a step further in Elder. That's great.
Well, and I feel like this is a trend that's going on right now in the JavaScript ecosystem. JavaScript for quite a while was all in on the fragmentation and many small packages and all of these different pieces. And we're seeing more and more folks going the route that we saw in some other ecosystems where it's like, no, we want end-to-end understanding of the system because we can do these types of optimizations. We want, sensible defaults that maybe you can configure. I'm thinking frameworks like Redwood trying to do this. I'm thinking tool chains like Rome trying to do this. Like we're seeing this idea, and tech industry, we do this all the time, right? You do
the pendulum swings.
Yeah, pendulum swings between, okay, we want to coordinate everything to we're going to break everything apart to we're going to coordinate everything again to break everything apart. Like this is part of what this industry does, and actually what I think technology does in general. But we're seeing that in JavaScript.
If I might just, I agree with you completely, K-Ball, and it's something that I've been sort of preaching on this podcast for a couple of years now. I think this is a good trend, and of course, every methodology has its pros and cons, and so you can get all in on a framework as a community and then see the other side, the downside of that. That being said, if I want to generalize something that Nick said about his ability to just go ahead and put this feature into Elder, I just want to generalize that and say, as developers, you should be building a toolkit. You should be building reusable things that you have that you can pull from and you can modify. And when you have that idea, you can say, you know what? Actually, if I go back to this thing I wrote before and I change it this way, then this project benefits, and I can take that to my next project that's going to benefit. Now, maybe it's not open source, maybe it's not a framework, maybe it's not for everybody to use, but be building up kind of a compendium of things that you can continually work on throughout your career and carry them with you, just like you would, a box of tools. But the nice thing about with software is, you buy a hammer, it's a hammer. But with software, we can build our own hammers. So, of course, use other people's code when it makes sense, but be building things that you have the control over and the knowledge over, that when you have that idea, you don't get blocked at some upstream, right? Like, oh, I was going to do this, but Svelte can't do that, so I can't do that. I'm not saying don't use Svelte. I'm just saying that, like, when you have the autonomy inside your own tooling, it's really powerful to see your ideas to fruition.
Well, and even if you can't control the code, write down how you solved it somewhere, right? Like, I've solved the same problem for like 3 or 4 different companies at different times for a couple different problems, because it's one that shows up regularly. And now, when I'm at a new company, I see us starting to have that problem, I can say, okay, great, I can solve that for you in a day because I've done it. I've got the patterns. And yeah, it's one where there's enough nuance that sort of complete open source solution isn't likely to work because it has to integrate with your data or whatever. But the pattern exists and I can just run with it. And you can do that by writing it up in a blog post or internal notes or something like that. So even if you can't build out that reusable code snippet for whatever reason, capturing those patterns and building yourself a pattern library is super valuable.
When I was writing Elder.js, sorry to interject here. When I was writing Elder.js, I wanted to make sure plugins were essentially first-class citizens. So there's like an entire hook system that enforces what, like, basically Elder.js under the hood has a global scope everywhere. But there's like a hook system that doesn't allow you to change things that shouldn't be mutated on different hooks. What that allowed us to do is, the idea here was to basically make sure that plugins could be first-class citizens. So, for instance, the number of times I've written resizing of images in order to do responsive images is just crazy, right? And so I think I've done it 4 or 5 times. But now, because plugins are a first-class citizen, I can just take that old code and basically put it into a plugin, and now anyone can use it. Yeah. And that's what I love about what I've built there is, like, all of my old tools that I have of like hidden repositories that aren't public. I'm slowly peeling them off and making a little ecosystem for Elder.js because now they have a place. Just a standalone package that resizes all your images doesn't really, that's cool. There's lots of those, right? And most people reach for something like Sharp in the JavaScript ecosystem to resize stuff. But, by having it as a part of the Elder.js ecosystem, you can now use it if you're using Elder.js as a static site generator, or if you can use the same code to, if you have a dashboard where you're uploading images for an internal by your team, and you can still use that on an Elder site. And so it's kind of nice to be tightly coupled, similar to like how Apple controls the hardware and the software. It's really nice. I really enjoy that.
Mm-hmm. So we've mentioned Elder. We said it's a static site generator. It has a very specific opinion or viewpoint of the world, which comes out of the work that you do and your businesses. So before we get too far into the details, Nick, why don't you just hit the nail on the head, give the synopsis of Elder.js and the SEO aspect and some of the high level things, so that we all have the same foundation to build on. Yeah,
so Elder.js started because I like to build massive sites that are basically SEO focused. So the last one was Broadband Now. I have a couple others, Find Energy and Elder Guide. And essentially what these do is they take a huge amount of government data and create good user tools or resources so people can make informed decisions. Well, if you're doing that and you're doing so much data, you either have the decision to spend a lot of time optimizing your SQL, or you can use a static site generator, because then the build times don't really matter, because if you're serving it from CDN, it doesn't really, static content's fast, right? Mm-hmm. So that's where Elder.js was born out of. But the problem that I found with the JavaScript ecosystem is generally SEO is kind of an afterthought. SEO is what happens after. And I got really badly burned. I was turning around a project. I'd acquired a site that had been built on WordPress, and I converted it to Gatsby with a team of really talented developers. And Gatsby kept on making core changes, and it kept, like, our rankings were just going down. And I was like, there needs to be a framework if I'm going to be going all in on JavaScript that takes SEO as a priority and makes it a priority. And while Elder.js doesn't do anything fancy from an SEO perspective, it's always going to be thought of first and foremost. Like SEO, like, we're not going to do anything that's going to hamper your efforts, right? So internally in the Svelte community, I was spending a lot of time lobbying to work on better hydration, because the way it was working, basically hydration for Svelte, it was trashing the entire DOM model and then rebuilding it. And so that would cause, this is my hypothesis, is that Google has 2 different bots. One is the one that just looks at HTML, and the other one is a JavaScript bot, and that's known. When you're basically trashing the DOM, Google doesn't know if it can trust the HTML. So it sends the JavaScript bot around. So we're having indexation problems. And for me, it's important that someone's watching that, especially if your business is built around SEO. So that's the main reason why I went all in on SEO for Elder.js. Does it do anything fancy? No, but it's the top consideration. Like every single decision I make is from the SEO view.
Nick, don't you feel like that problem is a little like SEO is a good example, is a concrete nugget that you can point to for like where most frameworks fail, but most JavaScript frameworks fail. But I think it's a symptom, of a wider problem, which I think like the root cause is just JavaScript bias. Dun dun dun. Love of JavaScript may cause using too much JavaScript to do all the things, and really
sleepiness,
like drowsiness, too much JavaScript,
building a simple blog with Gatsby.
Right.
Yeah,
building
exactly.
a simple blog with that's great. Or even really more concretely, like just not respecting the primitives of the web and, constructing too much DOM in the browser and like putting that cost on the user, it's just asinine. Am I allowed to say that on TV? Are we on TV?
JS9.
JS9, it's really, it's just problematic because we've kind of furled ourselves into this mess. And the sad thing is, the arc of the web, like the web is just, things get published and a lot of times not updated. And, it's the problem that's going to live with us for a long time. And so, it's going to take another generation, I think, to hopefully unfurl ourselves. But I'm glad that, that you're taking a step in the right direction with Elder.
Yeah, it was really surprising to me to find that there wasn't a single framework that really allowed you to just serve static JavaScript, right? Or just static HTML, right? That was generated by JavaScript. You had to have all this client whiz-bang. You had to have full hydration. You had to have like a service worker. You had to have all this stuff. And debugging service workers because you're having SEO issues is not fun. Like that was an issue that we had that was the closest thing that we could point to when we had issues with Gatsby is they made a major change to the default service worker. And like we just had to rip out the service worker in order to do it. And it just seemed like everything was overkill. And so I decided to, spend an afternoon building my own little framework, and it worked, but then it started growing, and you know how those things go.
Break right here. Break. That was a great ending to the thing. Yeah. You know how these things go.
To the thing. Yeah. Sorry, I cursed.
You didn't curse? You said asinine. That's
I don't know if asinine is like a curse or not. So I don't know. I don't know what the FAA or whatever
FAA.
PAA regulations are. I don't know. Just kidding. But
the podcast.
As long as you don't play music, we probably won't be delisted.
Yeah, exactly. As long as you don't play Endless Love or something. What was Nick playing that one day?
Endless Love.
I think it was Endless Love. So
I have no idea. I only heard about it secondhand.
Yeah, so Nick, we had one show where it was Nick and I think it was Emma, or was it you, Mel? Is it maybe Mel or Emma? And
Nick Nisi, by the way, not
Nick Nisi, not yourself. You weren't there. You know
he's
that.
Nick Reese. Yeah. Dun dun dun.
Reese's Pieces. And they went to the bathroom. So by the way, we're on a break. You can go to the bathroom if you want, but not while I'm telling the story. So sit down and listen. And so like basically Nick was just left live on YouTube by himself, just like if all three of you left, I'd just be sitting here. And so he got very awkward and he like turned on some music. I think it was Endless Love, just for himself and the audience. And then turns out that like 30 seconds or whatever got us delisted off of YouTube because of copyright infringement. So boom. That's hence the joke is always not to sing. And we often sing songs and do poetry and weird stuff on the show. So we have to watch ourselves. If we sing too well, we can get delisted. So I'm not sure.
Sing well. So
okay, good.
Not even close.
So you're in good company because none of us have got delisted except for Nick that one time, and he was not singing. Is anybody need to step away? If not, we'll hop right back in. Continuing general Elder / Svelte talk at this time. You got 35 minutes, Mel. We can
Yeah, but you guys can, yeah.
We can get that done.
Okay.
We got 2 segments and they're roughly 15.
Okay.
So. All right.
I was personally really interested in hearing about the plugin features, but I don't know what we're going to dive into next.
Let's start with
talk about the open architecture design.
Let's do a quick hit on Elder, the name, because it ties into like people wonder why, and then how you came to love or enjoy Svelte, which I think you touched on, but let's just like hit that nail on the head, and then we can just go into general Elder questions like plugins, architecture, features that are on your homepage, etc. Cool.
Awesome.
Aiden says it's the FCC that would be blocking us from saying asinine, not the FAA.
I know. I was
just asinine. You can't say asinine in an airplane.
I know.
The FAA comes after you.
It's hilarious. Yeah. No, just thank you.
Endless love. By the way, Mel, you've made the soundboard. Are you ready?
Web lovers.
So there you go. You remember
love
that?
It.
Yeah.
Yes, I do.
We're working on a soundboard, and you're on there.
It's awesome.
Web lovers. Nick, K-Ball still hasn't got on the soundboard.
Can I be web lover number
that's
one?
Okay.
We're just waiting for K-Ball to say something stupid. I mean, cool enough.
Oh, stupid. LOL.
I feel like every episode
is web lovers stupid?
So it's just what you want to pick.
Awesome.
Web lovers.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
All right. Did not just say that.
All right, let's get back to the
show. That's awesome. I want that.
Snap.
I love Emma. All right.
So Nick, let's just answer the question that's burning in everyone's mind right now. Why Elder.js? Do only old people use this thing? Elder.
Nope. Basically, the start of Elder.js was the first project that was built with it was elderguide.com. And from an SEO perspective, I've always had the theory that there's not really bad links. There are bad links, like that's not up for debate, but essentially any legitimate links are good links. And I decided to host the documentation on elderguide.com because people link to the documentation. So it's part of SEO experiment and part, it just seemed like it fit. It was an interesting name. My wife loved the name and she's a bit of an artist, so she drew the logo.
Awesome.
And so, yeah, it's just, it fit the brand of Elder Guide. So that's what we went with.
I'll give you this. It certainly has attributes of a good name. It's easy to say out loud and to phonetically to spell, right? So if I say it, you can spell it so you can get there. There's no namespace clashes on Elder. It's 2 syllables. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a good name, actually. And I did notice that you do have the docs on your elderguide.com site. And I thought this guy knows his SEO because that's actually a nice marketing move to put the docs right there. So
yeah, it's also, I think as a user going to it, I've gotten the feedback a couple times that people are like, what is this site? And then it like hits them that this is like a very meta thing because you're on the site that was generated by this tool.
Yeah.
And it's, I like that effect of it as well.
And
it also was kind of getting back. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no. I just said all the good puns too, right? Respect your elders. Yeah. There's so many, so many isms.
Get off my lawn.
Yeah. There's so
many.
You
darn kids. Well, you can yell at people.
I was going to say, it is in some ways going back to older types of technology where you can ship pure HTML and it only is shipping, a little bit of augmented JavaScript. And the fact that it's a super modern under the hood framework, like you're getting back to the roots of the web.
Like old school .js.
Yeah. Like JavaScript for interactivity. JS, not JavaScript for like make the DOM and like do all the things in the browser while the user's waiting.
That was awesome, but I feel like you're just trying to get back on the soundboard now.
No, I feel like Amel is
she's
now
like, I'm going to start singing all of my sentences.
No, the reality is that I was just encouraged to do the thing that I love, which is sing.
Oh, shoot.
So anyways.
We encouraged her.
Oh, no, I'll stop singing. No, but no, seriously, it's a dope name. Very, very dope.
It is cool.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I kind of miss the days of jQuery somewhat, just a little bit, where you sent like static HTML and you made it fancy with jQuery. I mean, I don't miss jQuery, but I miss that effect of you sent static HTML and it was pretty easy to reason about, and that's essentially what Elder.js started as, is just shipping static HTML, and then I found a way to partially hydrate Svelte components, and then the Svelte community asked, "Hey, would you open source this?" And originally, the entire templating library wasn't written in Svelte. It was all written in like a small hand-rolled lit HTML equivalent. And yeah, I ended up finding a way to make Svelte the default templating. So there's very clear server-side only templates, and then there's things that are client hydrated, and it works really well. I'm really happy with how it turned out. And what's nice about it is you don't have, if you're not using any interactivity, you ship 0 JavaScript to the browser. It's like so nice. It's exactly the way the web used to be. But if you need interactivity, it's right there.
Can you use other templating languages?
Currently, no, but there's no limitation.
He's like, no.
There's no limitation to, well, technically I could make it so you could do it with any other language. The main problem Elder.js has is it needs to be able to look up a component just by its name. So currently we have that in it's great support for that with Svelte, and it's like tightly coupled with a rollup system, which I hate bundlers, by the way. Thank you all the people that write bundlers. I don't like dealing with them. Thank you so much for what you do. And it's got an ES build integration as well. So that has to be super tightly integrated with Elder.js, or else Elder.js wouldn't be able to do what it does. And I'm just a little bit reluctant to bite off a whole nother ecosystem. And so for now, unless someone is really passionate and wants to come help take over that part of it, it's going to stay Svelte only.
Well, so let's flesh out then a little bit what it does. So what are the things that Elder.js does for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So before this, I ran several SEO companies, and all the way back, basically I've said that SEO has paid the bills since I've had bills to pay. And so 2006 is when I built my first website. Obviously it was on WordPress, scaled that company into having hundreds of websites built on WordPress. And what we found is when we had many different developers working on it, we generally just hired freelancers. It was really easy for a WordPress install to get pretty gnarly pretty quickly, right? And so what we did is we chose a single template that had its own custom built hooks in it. It was called Thesis Theme. And we had all of our sites ported to Thesis, and all the complexity had to live in a hooks.php file. That was our rule. And it allowed us to basically use developers interchangeably. So if one developer took a different job, we were able to hire someone else, and we knew all the complexity always lived in the hooks.php. And that philosophy allowed us to scale really, really well. And so I tried to do that with Elder.js. And essentially, Elder.js it started as a static site generator. It still does, still can be an SSR framework, but right now, us as a company, we use it as an SSR framework, but most people are interested in the static site generation side of things. One of the main things that I wanted here was hooks. And you can plug into any part of the page generation process or the build process and fully customize it. You can also disable almost all the features that Elder.js offers for you and plug in your own. So my goal...
Wait, sorry to interrupt you, but before we run deeply on that, can you clarify what you mean by hooks? Because I think, if I'm understanding correctly, you're meaning something that is closer to how WordPress thinks of hooks than what the JavaScript community often thinks of as hooks, which has been sort of owned as a name by React hooks. So Can you flesh out what you mean by hooking in this case? And then
for sure. Yeah, you nailed it. And thanks for pulling that back. Essentially, WordPress had hooks that allowed you to plug into any part of the WordPress page generation process. It's not like a React hook. It's basically, here are the props that are available to you. And if you mutate this state, you can expect that to be mutated for the entire generation of that page. It was pretty nice on WordPress. But it got pretty hairy too, because you're mutating global state. And so what Elder.js has is an entire hook system. So you can plug into the bootstrapping process, the page generation process, basically when it writes the JavaScript to the HTML, when it generates the HTML, you have full control of every single one of those steps. But what I tried to do is I like everything to be global scope because it's a lot easier to reason about in a framework. But I wanted very specific rules of when you could mutate things and when you couldn't. And so I have what I call a hook interface, and it's like it enforces a contract. So if you're going to change something on a specific hook and you're not allowed to, it's going to throw an error. And what's really nice about that is if you have a mid-sized team, well, for me, a mid-sized team, like 4 or 5 people working on it, it's really nice to have all the complexity in a single file, and you know that no one's going to mutate the global state ahead of you in a way that they shouldn't. And so,
got it. So these are request lifecycle hooks, essentially, as it goes through different parts of rendering your page. though they could be, I say request lifecycle, but it could actually be during a static site
build. Yeah.
Build lifecycle as well. It's like page generation lifecycle hooks.
There you go.
Yep. So there's basically 3 steps, right? So there's the bootstrap process where we read in all the routes and we set up all the known pages that we're going to generate. Then there's the page generation hooks, and then there's also build hooks. And you can plug into any of those and basically customize how Elder.js performs.
I'm in love with this idea. No, seriously, like I love this ownership of contracts end to end. Like, it feels very much like you're building in integration testing with the way you've structured this, because it's like people are not stepping on each other's toes, but you're also able to like enforce, enforce the data event propagation workflow, right? Because you're like, this is the way the global state should be mutated, not that way, this way. And so that's super cool. And it just, for me, just again, another example of like ownership of the full pipeline, and I think that's like that's very cool. Does it get annoying for users that there's so much opinion though? I'm curious, because that's with great guardrails comes, great, I would say, limitations sometimes in terms of how developers can, like how creative folks can get.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm just curious if that's been feedback
So
that you receive.
My goal in writing Elder.js was to have the framework get out of your way. And anytime you make that decision, you trade that for complexity up front of learning the framework, right? And so I actually think it's worse when you pick up a framework that's too easy to pick up. It's super easy to pick up, but it has opinions that you can't change. And so I would say that, yes, Elder.js does have a learning curve, but it's going to get out of your way if you need to customize something. And like Astro has gotten a lot of exposure recently for doing partial hydration across Svelte, Vue, and React, right? But when I look at their model, I'm concerned that if I want to do anything that's against them, I'm going to run into errors or issues. And so when I look at Elder.js, I know that I can customize every part of the flow, or the users could customize every part of the flow. They can disable everything that Elder.js does internally and write their own, or they can augment it as they please. So yes, there's a steeper learning curve, but I think with that learning curve comes power.
Yeah. I mean, so I think that's what's really cool here is actually it's both the open and closed design, and the open architecture that you've built with these plugins and hooks, quote unquote. It's just a good way to write software, right? Because it's extensible, infinitely extensible. So yeah, kudos on that. It seems like you're a good software architect, actually. So
I want to dig a little more on something you just said, though, Amel. So you highlighted hooks and plugins, but it feels like there's actually potentially some conflict between these, right? So a plugin architecture potentially allows you to kind of essentially distribute the responsibility of having to think about logic, right? Encapsulate whole bodies of functionality within a plugin that you maybe don't even have to understand anything about the internals of.
Right.
But you also just said you want to be able to look at a single hooks file and have a single location of responsibility for all the sorts of modifications. And those to me feel like they're in conflict. So I'm curious how Elder handles that. Are you unable to plug into hooks as a plugin, or how does that work?
So my goal was that the plugins would be first-class citizens. So they have exactly the same ability that users do, except they don't have access to one hook, which allows you to customize all the hooks. How we handle this is, it actually happened by accident. Plugins are essentially given their own closure scope. So when a plugin initializes, they set their default configuration, but they also get that configuration object during initialization. And that configuration object is passed through every single hook that the plugin calls on. So they're able to store all of their changes or their own specifications in their own scope that no one else has access to. Even the user doesn't have access to the plugin's scope on their own hooks.
So then when you're rendering a page, for example, if it's using the plugin, is it getting a scoped thing, and do these scopes nest, or do they interact? Can you have plugins that interact in some way or have dependencies between each other? Like how does this work?
So for example, the image plugin that does something similar to Gatsby Image that resizes all the images and makes them responsive interacts well with the Markdown plugin. You can toggle on a feature that will replace all of your markdown images with responsive images and just under the hood. And basically all of them run in the same scope, and you need to know, like, there's a different priority level. So if it's 100 priority, it's going to run first. If it's 0, then it runs last. Yes, a plugin could cause issues, but do unexpected things. But it's under the hood, it's exactly the same hook system you're working on. So if you know how the hook system works, you can go read the plugin's code. It's not a perfect implementation, but I do think that the ability to put all the plugin logic in its own scope that no one else can touch is pretty much the best solution I could come up with on that idea. But I'm honestly open to other ideas if there are ways to handle that.
Got it. So I guess part of what I'm trying to understand is, like, so for a small team and small projects, or small team and large project even, but for small team, having everything in one place where you're continually working with global things is great. And it makes a ton of sense. And I'm trying to understand whether Elder.js is essentially limited to that type of project environment, or if it's something that can scale to larger teams where being able to isolate segments of the site, segments of the code base, and apply locally scoped things. So it sounds like I'm hearing is if I wanted to create that type of isolation, for example, I have 2 independent teams, they're working on different parts of the site, and they want to be able to do local applications of changes via hooks or something like that. It sounds like what they would need to do is structure, either they're both working in the same file and having to think about the interactions, or they're structuring those local changes as plugins so that they are entirely scoped. Is that a fair assessment?
Yep. So if you had 2 separate teams, you could have them develop with the same power in a plugin by itself. And the plugin can have its own server-side templates. It can have its own hydrated Svelte templates. It has full control. So essentially, team A could be working under a plugin, team B could be working under a plugin as well, and you wouldn't be stepping on each other's toes. And the other thing is under the hood, Elder.js has several different debug flags. So if you turn on debug hooks, you'll get every single thing that mutated every single state on every hook. So you can see that. If you want to know what's causing performance delays, you toggle that, and you get a clean printout of every hook and how long it took to run in milliseconds.
Nice.
A whole bunch of these things are really trying to think about, how do I troubleshoot these things? And because troubleshooting like an opaque system is really hard. And so I think the framework should give you those tools.
And that's a great place where your background coming into this as someone with less development experience is super helpful, because you've been feeling acutely the pain of, how do I debug this thing without fully understanding all the pieces? And so from the start, you're building in that debugability.
Yep. Yeah, and the reason that essentially everything that Elder.js does is because I've needed it. And so I didn't know SQL before I started writing Elder Guide at all. I knew nothing. And so I was just like, you know what? I think I can basically spend time optimizing queries just randomly, or I can figure out which queries are running the slowest. And so I built a performance monitoring system right into the system. You can call, there's a perf prop that is passed into all the data files, and you can basically call that start and stop before the queries. And so for me, it made it super easy to know which queries were making the build slower. So now we build an 18,000 page site in 1 minute and 20 something seconds, right? So that's way faster. But at the beginning, it was over an hour because the queries weren't optimized. And now more than half of all that page generation time is waiting for data. So.
Yeah. So Nick, first of all, kudos to skills. I think for me, what I'm learning about Elder is that it's this really good marriage between, I would say practical developer needs, and easy maintenance of software, because there's a lot of kind of crufty developer tools that do XYZ. Bundlers, for example, not the easiest to maintain and like ramp up and manage either. So I think there's like a really good balance that you've struck. But more importantly, I think there's so much lost with tools because they're built in silos. There's very little kind of like real world use case that's applied to some of the designs around like developer tooling. So it's just so nice that you have like these real world needs and just like built right in. So just kudos. It's really
Thank you.
very refreshing.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's intimidating to release software. I know it works, but I also know that there's probably better ways to do what I've done. And I'm not the smartest person in the room, and that's the scary thing. Is on the internet, the room is pretty large, and so I'm sure there's ways to really improve the site dramatically. And I would welcome that feedback, or not just the site, but the architecture dramatically. One of the things I'm most proud of is partial hydration, and essentially when you're going to hydrate a component in just about any framework, you have to deal with what's server rendered, and then you have to take those same props and then mount another component on a target div or element, right? And that's a really tedious process. And it's really surprising to me that none of these front-end frameworks, when you do server-side hydration, they just don't give you the hydration code right away. It just is very surprising to me that, like, when you pass it into the server-side object, we don't care about the bundle size that much of the server-side object. Just pass me back the client-side code. All I need to do is pass in the folder structure. So that's where Elder.js kind of started. And now if you need to hydrate a component, you just go into one of your Svelte server files, you type hydrate-client, and all those props will be hydrated under the hood for you automatically. And it really makes making the islands approach, so to speak, or this modular, I'm only going to hydrate what needs interactivity, incredibly easy to do.
All right, we got a break right here. Slot that in. Mel has 11 minutes, so if everyone's cool, we'll hop right back in. K-Ball wants to dig more into hydration, so we'll just
start there.
Take it right there, K-Ball. Keep going.
Yeah. So I'd love to dig in a little bit more to what you're talking about in terms of hydration. I'm not super familiar with the islands approach you're referencing, so maybe a little bit of a high-level explanation of what that is. But the key problem that I have seen across a number of frameworks that do server-side rendering plus client-side hydration is what's sort of the uncanny valley effect, where the user sees the code or sees the page. It looks as though it should be able to be interactive, but there's a second, 2 seconds, sometimes even 3 or 4 seconds before they can actually interact with the page. Clicking or hovering does not have effect in the way they'd expect. So I'm curious, one, if that's a problem within Elder.js, and if not, how you resolved it.
Okay, yeah. So as far as the what the islands approach is, I think that was popularized by Jason Miller. If I'm getting his name wrong, sorry. I don't read that much JavaScript. I just know that other people have that much JavaScript blog, so to speak. But I know that many other people have mentioned his name. He popularized the idea that instead of mounting one big component that controls the entire client side, you're going to mount many individual components, and they each are encapsulating their own logic. That's what the islands approach is. And as far as the input delay or like the interactivity that's not there, how we've approached it on Elder.js is currently all components use a intersection observer. So on body load, it triggers an intersection observer that allows you to, essentially when you scroll into view, it mounts a component. Now on Elder.js Next, what we do is we have a request idle callback as the default. So now it's essentially going to whenever your browser's not doing anything, it's going to be hydrated. But you can override all those features by just saying hydration options is very clearly spelled out in the documentation. You can do it the moment the page is loaded. It can be preloaded. You can do all these different things. The assets can be preloaded. The JavaScript can be, so it executes faster. In general, Svelte components mount pretty quickly. And if you're mounting very, very large Svelte components, like what we're doing on Fine Energy, they need a lot of data. It can be a little bit slower if you're using that prop compression idea that I had suggested. In my experience, that can be like 36 milliseconds or something like that on really major amounts of data. Sometimes a bit higher on slower browsers, but in general, I haven't seen any input delay issues. And if you see them, please let me know because I'd like to troubleshoot those.
So a couple of other things as we're winding down here, but I think these are important. Production, installations, and stability. So one thing that we're all well aware of in the JavaScript space is how fast everything moves and changes. And one thing that caught my eye about Elder, you say it right there on the homepage, is that stability is a priority for you. And you've also said that the team has dedicated, or let me use your language. I lost it. What's the word you use?
basically I'm committed to funding or personally developing the site until 2023 or 2024. As long as I have sites that are production that are running on it, it's going to be maintained. Is essentially the reality of it.
Yes. Yeah.
Today, I essentially run you could call it a startup studio where I make several different investments in different sites, and I have different projects that all run on Elder.js. And I don't see that ending anytime soon because some of these projects are starting to get substantial traction. As soon as the projects are self-sustaining, someone's going to be hired to maintain Elder.js full time, and is my goal. Yeah. And I essentially see that we're seeing this iteration on our properties where static site generation is great, but sometimes when you're dealing with content heavy sites, you need real-time feedback, and so server-side rendering is important. And so that is backwards compatible, and you can basically upgrade Elder.js to the latest. And I try to keep so few breaking changes. The only thing that's changed is I think a couple hook interfaces, a couple entries where they've been added. There's been more permissions added to it. My goal is to keep it backwards compatible so that I don't have my own upgrade issues. But as far as server-side rendering, I was able to fit that right in without any breaking changes. And now you have an upgrade path to go right to server-side rendering if you need it.
So a stable API plus a committed team until 23, 24 is kind of your plan. Of course, you have all these sites in production, so you're highly motivated to at least make sure it keeps building as the web changes. Tell us about some of the production installs, because this is one of the things where, like, when the rubber hits the road, excuse me, when the rubber hits the road, software that's used to build real things, I think, is more valuable than software that's supposed to be used to build real things. And a lot of our stuff, we hope it's adopted, we hope it's used. And so we can tend to get somewhat, I think there's an old term, architecture astronaut. I don't know. We can tend to kind of develop things in a silo, or not a silo, but in a vacuum, and they don't get used. But like, this has been used since day one. So I think there's actually, like, I just want to emphasize how much that actually matters with software, is that, like, this is driving real world sites, and you have how many sites that are in production? Of course, elderguide.com. And you also just mentioned another one. Tell us about some of the installs.
There's 5 that I personally manage.
There you go.
Sorry to cut you off. There's 5 that I personally manage, and there's 2 that I talk about publicly. One is Elder Guide, another is Find Energy. Find Energy is kind of the latest and greatest. This is where we've been. If you look at the Git history, there's been a flurry of activity. It's because we were shipping that, and that added a whole bunch of features and a whole bunch of plugins that site needed. And I'd already done the work, so we might as well open source it. And so essentially, my business model, like I was saying, is find huge amounts of government data, make sense of it, and make tools for users to make informed decisions. Both these businesses, Elder Guide's traffic growth is going great. Find Energy has just launched, so we'll see where it goes. I also have a couple others that I don't talk about where the traffic growth is kind of off the charts, which is pretty nice. It's working, and I built it for my own needs, and I'm sharing it because I want to improve as a person, and I think that it's interesting to give back to the community. For a long time, I was the guy that was like, WordPress is free, right? And it's like, I got this. I can build sites for free, and I feel like I can go back and give back now in a way that I just couldn't before. And so that's really important. And it's, for me, like on the different sites, it's like having control of something and adding features based on my experience is really useful, right? Like, something we haven't touched base on is shortcodes. I think shortcodes, I'm just very surprised they're not popularized in the JavaScript community. It's like, when you have static content, you have a team that's managing static content, they don't want to touch code, and you don't want to have to interface with that team. You just want to empower them. And shortcodes are a fantastic way to future-proof content. Instead of embedding a YouTube embed, 50 different times, 50 different embeds, you just copied it off of YouTube. You could create one shortcode, and then when your content team needs to put out a video, they use that shortcode, and suddenly the YouTube changes the embed code. You change it in one place, and it future-proofs your content. And I just, for me, Elder.js is always going to have the things that we need to build flagship SEO sites, because we need them, and I see no downside to open sourcing it, because SEO is a hard game. If other teams start adopting this framework, great. I hope they contribute to it. And to be 100% honest, one of the other driving factors for releasing Elder.js is hiring is really hard. Hiring talented developers is hard. And if you have people who are picking up a cutting edge framework and they're using Svelte and they're kind of at the bleeding edge, you have passionate people. And when you're in the hiring, like when I'm in the hiring seat, so to speak, it's a lot harder to see if someone's really passionate. But already where I'm hiring people out of the Svelte community because they are passionate. They're using Elder.js. They know Svelte, and I'm looking for people that have diverse backgrounds. It's like one guy is amazing at huge data sets. Could he pick up Svelte and Elder.js? He picked it up super fast. And so part of it for Elder.js is it's a way of hiring for me. It's also like a way of casting that net, because hiring's expensive and hard. Finding good people is really what makes the difference in a business. So there's a lot of motivating factors for me to continue maintaining it.
Mm-hmm.
So Nick, I have a burning question that I can't believe we haven't asked yet. But so why Svelte? And really also, given that you're a fan of moving fast, working in a bleeding edge ecosystem has its like perks, but also downsides, right? Because you don't have as much of an ecosystem, right? So you can't just like, use the table library as easily and use the drag and drop library as easily or whatever.
Right.
Like, so the kind of composability ecosystem isn't as mature. And so I'm just curious, like, why Svelte, and why'd you put your money on Svelte, even like given that it's bleeding edge. And then also I'm curious, what's the productionization process been like, and how has it been limiting or enabling? And, just as curious to hear if y'all have hit that.
Great questions. On my end, I find that I had built a couple sites with Gatsby, and so I was familiar with React, and I felt like it was just massive overkill. I tried Vue. I built a production app with Vue on businessinternet.com, and I found it was super early. It was super early days when I had done that, and I found its API a little hard to use. And so I was trying out Svelte on a vacation, as one does. I was like, there's this new library. Let's see what this looks like. And I went through the tutorials, and it was like, this just makes sense. Like you get basically the single file components with interactivity that is super easy to maintain and reason about. You got stores, so you don't have to deal with Redux or any of the other magic that needs to happen to keep things in sync. And yeah, it just seemed like it was an obvious choice. And so when I started building Elder Guide, I tried to use Sapper, which is now SvelteKit, and I found it was too hard to reason about what was running on the server and what was running on the client. And that was the main like catalyst that and the builds of like a 4,000, 5,000 page site was taking an incredible amount of time. And with Elder.js, I'm like, this has to be faster. And part of the problem is many of these static site generators, what they do is they spin up a headless browser and they crawl your site like a bot would do. One of the key things that Elder.js did from the beginning was we need you to define all of your requests up front, unless you're using server-side rendering. And that allows us to have a superpower where we can build everything in parallel. In some cases, there was one user that was testing Elder.js against Hugo, and we were beating Hugo on like 10,000 page sites. So that's the JavaScript can be very fast if you're thinking about it and you have all the data up front. So yeah, as far as going to production on Svelte.
Well, actually, before you go on to that, so to bring it full circle, it really did help you move faster. Like the kind of the simplicity of Svelte, like there's some wind there that's like was worth it for y'all, right?
Definitely. So a good example is I've worked with the same HTML, CSS guy for years, right? And he knows some JavaScript, and he picked up Vue. He's been someone that I've worked with for a long time. And I was like, hey, try this out. Tell me what you think. He's like, I can do things that I never thought I could do. And that, like, giving people superpowers allows a small team to move much, much faster. And I think Svelte does that in a way that I didn't see in the Vue or React ecosystems. And so, yeah, you don't have the huge libraries. You don't have like React Table or any of these other major libraries, but building a table interface is an hour work. It's not that hard to make your own reusable components. We really find we haven't been limited by that at all, and it's in a lot of ways. We also probably ship a lot less JavaScript because we write it all in house.
Very cool. Well, we have to wrap here. Of course, listeners, all the links to all the things Elder Guide and Elder.js and any other links that Nick gives. I'm sure he'll give us a bunch because he's the SEO guy. So we'll link them up in the show notes for you guys to click through on. K-Ball, Mel, thanks so much for hanging out with us. Wanted to give a shout out to a couple upcoming episodes. K-Ball's doing a cool interview about JavaScript on WASM. WASM will be back. We have a show with Faraz. We're going to dive into his Wormhole app, which is a really cool new project from Faraz. So we'll dive deep into that. And we also have Kent C. Dodds coming soon to JS Party talking advanced React concepts. So that's just a few shows we have coming down the pipeline. So definitely subscribe if you haven't, and do come and join us live each and every Thursday at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. Hang out in the JS Party channel of our chat and party with us, y'all, because it's lots of fun as we record. Nick, we really appreciate you coming on the show. We appreciate you kicking your imposter syndrome in the face and, open source and Elder and getting all the goods.
And thanks for having me. It's been a blast.
All right, that's our show. We'll talk to y'all next week. Post-show.
Cool.
Chill vibes. Cool.
Awesome.
All right. Cool. That was good.
It was a little scatterbrained, a little bit maybe, but that's me. That's how I work. So sorry if hopefully that can be picked up.
No, I think it was, I thought it was all pretty reasonable in terms of the scatterbrainness. I followed everything you were saying. I don't know about you, K-Ball, but I feel like you did a good job.
Yeah, I think it went well.
Thanks.
And, where there were places where there was some missed context, I think we were able to generally dig back in and get it. So, yeah,
totally.
No worries. That's why we're here to keep you on.
Yeah, thank you so much, because I don't have all the context that your listeners have. Like, I have no formal training. Like, I started writing JavaScript because I wanted to write a high frequency cryptocurrency bot, and I knew some JavaScript. So that's my entry into the whole space. And so thank you. This was fun. I enjoyed it. We moved tens of millions of dollars a day on Binance for several months, and I wrote the whole thing. And so it was,
Did you make any money?
So this was in 2018 when the market was going like this. So we were making on paper like $8,000 a day, but like at the end, I think we walked away with like $2,000 profit. It was well, when you're paying like $2,000 a month for the server at AWS and like everything, and we got this, like, we're not recording, are we? We are still recording.
We're streaming.
We're still streaming.
Don't say anything you don't want. I actually got to roll, y'all.
Okay.
Thanks, Nick. It's been fun.
Right. We'll leave that to the listeners' minds, and we'll hang up now.
Yeah.
All right. Bye, Nick.